Is Pakistan heading towards a default? That's a thought that has penetrated our world, both digital and real. With the State Bank of Pakistan's foreign exchange reserves falling to a near low of 4 years and a delay in securing IMF tranche, the rumor mill is abuzz that Pakistan may not be able to pay back its loans. We're back to seeking funds from friendly nations, but even that is taking time and the wait is adding fuel to the fire of default chatter. But before we go any further, we first need to understand what exactly it means to default. What is default? In simple terms, default or sovereign default, as it is called in case of countries, it's a country's inability to repay creditors the principal amount or interest on loans. To help understand the process, consider taking a loan of 100,000 rupees and promising your creditor to repay the amount in 12 months. Now, 12 months have passed, but you don't have the amount to repay the loan, and so you default on your payment. The most recent example of a country defaulting is Sri Lanka. For the first time in its history, the island nation defaulted on its debt when it failed to pay $78 million worth of debt interest. Now that we know what default is, let's talk about what happens when a country defaults. Bankruptcy triggers a cascading effect. When a country defaults, its government and institutions suffer immediate loss in legitimacy amongst its own people, as well as international lenders. When countries have a poor credit rating, it's hard for them to raise debt. Then comes the de-evaluation of currency. And the stock market also crashes as many people tend to withdraw their deposits from foreign exchange savings, leading to domestic banks facing a liquidity crunch. Now, the bigger problems come for those in trade. Exporters and importers are no longer able to take credit, which then slows down the industry. Consequently, people lose jobs and unemployment rates shoots up. Here's where it gets a little different between when a country defaults as opposed to a person defaulting. For countries, all is not lost for creditors. Countries never go out of business. But defaulting means less creditors are willing to trust your ability to repay. So due to risk of another default, they charge you higher interest to protect their own money. Now that we've got basics about default sorted, let's talk about Pakistan's economic situation. Are we really heading towards a default? We asked economic reporter Ariba Shahid.
It's really interesting that in the past few weeks, we've heard a lot, and not just the past few weeks, but the past few months, we've been hearing the word default more often. It's interesting because until January 2022, the word default was not something that we would hear in discussions. And we heard it in June, then we heard it until the IMF review, and now we're hearing it again because the IMF review, the 9th review, is taking longer than expected. And also because Christmas holidays are going to come in. If it doesn't go on track, we won't hear of a decision until January. And it's also very interesting because our finance minister says probability of default is only 10%. And I don't think he understands that only 10% is not a good indicator. According to the Bloomberg numbers, 10% is the probability of the default. The CDS shows the cost of insurance, the cost of giving debt to Pakistan, which is exceedingly high because people think that Pakistan may not be able to meet its debt obligations. In the past, we've got rollovers from China, which basically says, listen, we can't give you money. Please just let us keep it longer. So while we haven't defaulted, because no one has been like, oh, we absolutely need the money right now, and while our reserves are dwindling, we are not at the default stage at this moment. But if our creditors all decide to go tough on us, we do not get the aid that we are expecting to get, we do not get support that we are expecting to get. And let's say the next time China does not roll over their debt, let's say the IMF 9th review does not happen, this 10% will significantly skyrocket. For the past few months, the state bank has been making sure that the inflows and outflows are mixed and matched together in such a way that outflows do not exceed a certain point to make sure our reserves are strong enough. The reserves aren't particularly strong. We have an import cover of less than 1.5 months. It's around 1.12, which means that our country only has enough money in its reserves to pay for imports for around a month and a few weeks. That is alarming. You know things are very bad in a country when the central bank, the regulator, comes out and says, you know what, minors can only carry this much and adults can only carry this much. So things have gone bad, and they are taking steps to control the outflows of FX from the country. But these are only short-term solutions. The long-term solution is Pakistan really needs to think its debt management strategy. And in addition to that, it needs to find robust and sustainable ways to increase its inflows, other than just relying on remittances from overseas Pakistanis.
So, what can Pakistan do to avoid being another Sri Lanka? We asked economist Uzair Younus. A little heads up though, he is not very optimistic.
Pakistan has chronic external sector risks at this point. It is shut out of the international bond market. The IMF program is in the doldrums in the sense that we have not had resolution of the ongoing review and it's been delayed. That delay obviously spooks the global bond market, spooks bilateral creditors like Saudi Arabia and China, which is why the reserves continue to slide. So broadly speaking, near-term scenario is risky, but that does not mean Pakistan is facing imminent sovereign default at this point. There's a lot of things that have brought Pakistan to this point over the decades, right? And just to put things in context, today, 30% of Pakistan's external debt is owed to China or Chinese commercial banks. In 1990, Pakistan's GDP per capita was higher than that of China. So over 30 years, the economic decline has been such that Pakistan, the average Pakistani has gone from being richer than the average Chinese to now, owing 30% of the country's external debt to the Chinese themselves. To get out of this morass, you need a structural reform of the entire economy, which currently works for the few at the expense of the many. So if you are somebody who is connected, is part of the elite, you bought new e-trons, a new Audi, some new bags, go out abroad on vacation, Pakistan works for you if you are part of that class. For the others, it doesn't. 65% inflation since January 2019 versus 25% in India and Bangladesh, roughly speaking, over the same period. To get out of this, what we need is basically fiscal reform to begin with, which deals with the collection of resources, i.e. taxes, and spending on certain segments of society. On the tax front, for example, the city of Pune, which is a fraction in terms of population to the size of the province of Sindh, the city of Pune raises more in real estate taxes than the entire province of Sindh. The picture is similar in Punjab and other provinces of Pakistan. The productive formal sectors of the economy are imposed with additional taxes that basically go north of 50%, which again is a disincentive to productivity and developing an exportable surplus. So you cannot get out of the external sector issue without resolving the fiscal crisis in the first place. Secondly, investment in terms of different sectors of the economy needs to be recalibrated. For example, the UNDP tells us that $17.5 billion a year is given to elite segments of society. Well, I'm not saying do it zero tomorrow because everything takes time. But Pakistan needs to figure out how to invest in its own people, where Pakistan has the lowest youth literacy rate, for example, in the SAARC region, just above Afghanistan. Everybody else is north of 90%. Pakistan is roughly 75% in youth literacy. So to get out of this issue, it took a lot of decades to get here. And to get out of this issue, it will take a long time. But the starting point has to be restructuring of the economy so that it works for the many. And that begins with restructuring of the fiscal side and the tax code that incentivizes investments in productivity, production, exports, not in real estate speculation where only the few get rich and then import. Unfortunately, I see a lot more pain around the corner. And the reason for that is that nobody, at least that I speak to in the power corridors of Islamabad or Rawalpindi, fully grasps the serious nature of the crisis confronting this country at this point. And I think so long as there is not a recognition about how serious things are and how fundamentally broken this economy is, again, for the many, not for the few, things are not going to change. On top of it, this is a question I've had for myself and I don't have the answer to, is that we as a political economy in Pakistan are expecting the beneficiaries of the status quo, what I described in terms of the economy not working for the many, just working for a few. The few are actually capable of instituting policy in this country, right? Not the many. So the beneficiaries of the status quo who got enriched with these structural imbalances, we are expecting them to fundamentally restructure the economy at a near-term loss to themselves. And I think that's where the real problem lies in this political economy, is that the fundamentals of politics and policy making are skewered towards the very beneficiaries of the status quo. And so long as that remains the case, you can bring in whatever government you want with this current structure. It is unlikely that they will fundamentally change course because doing so would actually lead to financial and economic losses for them in the near term. Today, I published a piece in Dawn as well saying that more politics, not less politics, is the answer to Pakistan's economic crisis. More inclusive politics is the answer to Pakistan's economic crisis. Representation of farmers, trade unionists, labor rights people, that's the answer to Pakistan's economic problems. Representation of people who come from agricultural background, whose children are illiterate, so that they have a say in the economic policy making of this country. That's the solution. I'm not saying revolution is the path forward, but I fundamentally do not see people like Shaukat Tareen or Ishaq Dar or others who've been at the helm of affairs for the last 30 years finding the answers that need to be found. Remember, this is a country where the median age is 24 years old. So it is a bit weird to me that folks who have negotiated with the IMF for 25 years and proudly talk about it, i.e. the current finance minister, Ishaq Dar, is still at the helm of affairs, is still negotiating with the IMF, is still talking about an overvalued currency being important for the economy when we know it's been a disaster.
When you're saying how can a country not default, it means pay back its creditors, restructure its debt. These are some things that Pakistan can do in the short run, in the short term, to avoid defaulting, avoid being known as a country that has defaulted. However, it is important to note that restructuring your debt is in the form a soft default, if not a full-blown default, which we have done in the past. That is one thing that Pakistan can do right now.